What if I told you a single meal could reveal everything about America today? Not just the food on the plate, but the fear, the division, the unspoken rules that decide who belongs and who doesn't. That's exactly what happened one cold evening, when JD Vance pulled into a diner, a place that felt familiar, but would soon become something else entirely. Something dangerous. The highway stretched behind him like a long, dark memory, the asphalt still warm from the afternoon sun. His truck rumbled to a stop on the gravel lot of Tom's Diner, just another roadside spot, the kind where coffee was strong, waitresses were sharper, and the smell of bacon seemed permanently soaked into the walls. The neon sign buzzed, flickering, in and out, casting a sickly red glow over the parking lot. Something about it made JD hesitate. Just for a second, then he shook it off. It was just a diner. He stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel, and walked toward the entrance. Through the window, he could see the usual setup: vinyl booths, chrome stools, a jukebox that probably hadn't worked since the Reagan years, but there was something else, something off. People were watching, not just a glance, watching. Eyes flicked up from plates, hands froze mid-bite, and for a brief moment, the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. That was the first sign. JD stepped inside. A bell jingled overhead, breaking the silence. The air smelled like coffee, sizzling burgers, and something deeper: unease. Behind the counter, a waitress, mid-20s, sharp eyes, name tag reading Katie, was pouring coffee into a customer's cup. But when she saw JD, her hand stopped mid-pour. She didn't spill. She didn't even flinch. She just froze. And in that split second, JD knew. They recognized him. It wasn't curiosity in their eyes. It was something else. Something closer to fear. Katie quickly set the coffee pot down and wiped her hands on her apron, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. D approached, keeping his voice easy. Evening, got a table for one. A simple request. Nothing unusual. But Katie hesitated. It was less than a second, but JD caught it. The kind of hesitation that meant someone was making a decision. Right there, right then. The kind that meant something was wrong. Finally she spoke, her voice lighter than it should have been. Actually, I'm sorry, sir, we're full tonight. JD blinked. Full? He glanced around. 3 empty booths, 2 bar stools open, a whole corner of the diner untouched. He turned back to her, keeping his expression neutral. Full, huh, Katie? Nodded quickly. Too quickly. JD didn't move. He just let the moment hang. Let her sit in it. Outside, a passing truck rumbled by. Inside, the silence stretched. Then, she did it again. That quick flick of the eyes. Past him. Not at the booths. Note in the menu, at the kitchen doors, JD had spent enough time in politics, and enough time around people who lied for a living, to know what was happening. She wasn't deciding on her own. She was waiting for permission. Someone in that kitchen had already decided he wasn't welcome here. JD could feel it now, the air getting heavier, the walls inching closer. A trucker in the corner gripped his coffee mug a little tighter. A woman at the counter stirred her soup, but hadn't taken a bite. Nobody was talking anymore. They were waiting to see what JD would do. He took a slow breath and looked Katie in the eyes. Let me talk to the manager. Another hesitation. Then, with the same forced smile, she said, He's busy right now. JD didn't even have to look to know she was lying. He could hear it in her voice, see it in the way she shifted her weight, like she was bracing herself for something she didn't want to happen. He had a choice: let it go, or push further. He chose the second. I'll wait. Katie's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She hesitated for one more beat, then turned and disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. JD stayed where he was. He could feel the energy shifting, again. Conversation started back up, too forced, too casual. Someone coughed. The waitress behind the counter kept wiping the same damn spot. The place was pretending to be normal. But it wasn't. JD hadn't just walked into a diner. He had walked into something else entirely, and whatever it was, he was now right in the middle of it. JD watched as the kitchen doors swung shut behind Katie. The moment she disappeared, the diner exhaled. Conversations, once stiff and staged, started creeping back in. The old jukebox crackled back to life, playing some forgotten 70s track. A man in a trucker's cap muttered something under his breath, but JD didn't move. He stood in the same spot, hands resting lightly on the counter, listening. A gust of wind outside rattled the window panes, and for just a second, he caught his own reflection in the glass, a lone figure in a place that didn't want him there. And then faintly, from behind those kitchen doors, voices, low, urgent. JD's instincts kicked in. Years in politics had taught him a lot, not just about people, but about what happens when people don't want you somewhere. And this wasn't just bad service. He could feel the weight of eyes still on him. The trucker in the corner took a slow sip of coffee. A woman with short, curly hair flipped a newspaper without reading it. Nobody told him to leave, but nobody told him to stay either. JD turned slightly, pretending to check his phone while angling his ear toward the kitchen. He strained to pick up the conversation behind the doors. "Shouldn't be here." Muffled, but clear enough. "You sure it's him?" another voice asked. JD's pulse ticked up. They weren't talking about some random customer. They were talking about him. A third voice, lower, rougher. "Saw his truck." No mistake. JD clenched his jaw. His truck? Someone had recognized it? That didn't make sense. He wasn't driving anything special, just a beat-up F-150 with a couple 100,000 miles on it. Then again, his name had been in the news, and not in a good way. The door swung open suddenly, and Katie stepped back into the room, her fake smile glued in place. But JD caught it. The way her hands were gripping the edge of her notepad. The tension in her shoulders. She was stalling. "Sorry about that," she chirped, voice too bright. "Manager's real busy tonight." JD said nothing. He just looked at her. Katie's smile flickered, just for a second. Then she glanced past him again. JD followed her gaze to the front door, and that's when he saw them. Two men, tall, broad, dressed too neatly for a roadside diner. At this hour, they weren't locals, they weren't truckers, and they sure as hell weren't here for the pie. The taller one had a stiff, upright posture, hands clasped in front of him like a bouncer outside a club no one wanted to be in. The other, stockier, was tapping something in his pocket, like he was checking for something heavy, something metal. JD's stomach tightened. Not cops, not feds, but not just some guys grabbing a burger, either. Through the diner window, JD caught a glimpse of a black van idling in the lot, engine running, lights off, waiting. For him. The air in the diner shifted. JD could feel it. That unspoken moment where everyone knew something was about to happen. But no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. Katie took a half step back. The trucker in the corner suddenly had somewhere else to be. JD made a decision. Fast. He didn't turn to face the two men. Didn't give them the satisfaction of reacting. Instead, he kept his body relaxed, took out his wallet, and tossed a 20 on the counter. Then, without a word, he walked toward the bathroom. Not the exit. The bathroom. Why? Because he needed one. Second. Just one. To figure out his next move, but the moment he stepped inside and locked the door, his phone vibrated in his pocket. One new message, no name, just 3 words. "Don't run. Watch." JD's pulse slammed against his ribs. Someone else knew he was here, and they were already ahead of him. JD's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He was standing in a diner bathroom that smelled like lemon cleaner and old pipes, staring at his phone. 3 words, "Don't run. Watch," sent from an unknown number. His fingers hovered over the screen. Every instinct screamed at him to respond. "Who is this? How do you know I'm here?" But he stopped himself. Whoever sent that text wasn't guessing. They knew, which meant they were watching. JD exhaled slowly, scanning the room. A single stall, a cracked mirror above the sink, A flickering fluorescent light hums in the ceiling. No windows. No back exit. He was boxed in. He swiped the screen, switched to his camera, and snapped a quick shot of the text, just in case. Then, sliding his phone into his pocket, he turned on the faucet. Not because he needed to wash his hands, because he needed time. Water rushed into the sink, masking the sound of his breathing. He stared into the mirror. Outside, the diner was too quiet. He couldn't hear the jukebox anymore, couldn't hear the low hum of conversation. Something had changed. Then, footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming toward the bathroom. JD's jaw tensed. The sink's faucet squealed as he shut it off. The footsteps stopped, right outside the door. A pause. Then, knuckles. Rapped against the wood. Not a hard knock, not aggressive, just testing. JD didn't answer. A second passed. Then the doorknob twitched. Someone was checking if it was locked. JD's muscles coiled. His fingers curled into a fist. The handle jiggled again, just slightly, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure if they wanted to try forcing it. Then, silence. JD held his breath. Whoever it was, they weren't leaving. They were waiting. JD's eyes darted around the room. No windows, no back door. But there was one thing. An air vent. Small, near the ceiling. Too high to reach without climbing onto the sink. Could he fit? Maybe. Would it be loud? Definitely. Could he do it before the guy outside decided to try kicking? In the door? That was the real question. JD moved fast, shoving the trash can beneath the vent. He stepped up, balanced himself, and reached for the screws. Tight. He gritted his teeth. Then, a sound outside. Not from the bathroom door. From the diner itself. Something heavy, something metallic. A chair scraping? Is a gun sliding onto a table? JD froze. Then, a voice. Low. Calm. Too calm. He's still in there. That did it. JD launched into motion. He yanked his jacket off, wrapped it around his fist, and punched the vent cover. Crack, the brittle metal, bent inward. Outside the bathroom, scrambling footsteps. They heard that. JD didn't stop. He ripped at the vent, pulling the cover free, and shoving himself up. His shoulders scraped against the edges. Tight fit. Then, boom. The bathroom door shook violently. Someone had slammed into it. JD braced himself, pulling with everything he had, squeezing through the vent as his chest compressed against the frame. Then, the door exploded open. The moment was a blur, a dark figure lunging. JD's feet vanish into the vent, hands grabbing for him, missing, and then, darkness. JD didn't have time to think. The air duct was narrow, barely wide enough for him to crawl. He dragged himself forward on his elbows, the metal groaning beneath his weight. Behind him, the bathroom filled with voices, angry, confused, searching. Then, bang! A gunshot. JD flinched, his body jolting against the vent walls. They weren't playing games anymore. He gritted his teeth and kept crawling. Forward, forward, through the dark, through the unknown. Until, a fork. The air duct split in two, left or right. No time to think. JD picked one. Left, and then, the floor beneath him disappeared. 1 second he was crawling, the next he was falling. JD's stomach lurched. For a split second he was weightless, suspended in the air, arms flailing, mind racing. The metal duct had given out beneath him, snapping like cheap tin. Then, gravity won. Thump! He hit something hard. His shoulder screamed, in protest as he rolled onto his back, gasping. He wasn't dead. That was a start. He forced his eyes open, blinking against the dim light. He'd fallen maybe 10 feet, landing on what felt like a wooden platform. Not concrete, not tile. Wood. He sat up, wincing. The air around him was thick and musty, carrying the scent of old paper and dust. Where the hell was he? Above, the broken duct groaned. Dust and debris trickled down. JD's pulse spiked. If the guys from the bathroom had heard that. And they definitely had. They'd be coming fast. He had seconds to move. He scrambled to his feet, taking in his surroundings. Rows of wooden shelves stretched into the darkness, stacked high with crates and boxes. Some had military-style labels, others were scrawled with strange symbols. It looked like a storage room, a very old one. JD's breath hitched as he spotted something glinting in the dim light. A brass plaque bolted to one of the shelves. He stepped closer, brushing the dust away. The words carved into the metal made his stomach drop. Property of the U.S. government, restricted access. Violators will be prosecuted. J. froze. What kind of diner had a government storage room underneath it? His brain was still trying to process it when he heard voices above. He fell through here. Find another way down. They were close. Too close. JD spun, scanning for an exit. Nothing obvious. No stairs, no doors. Just walls lined with ancient, dust-covered shelves. Then, his eyes landed on something in the corner, a metal ladder bolted to the wall, leading downward. His chest tightened. How far did this place go? He didn't have time to hesitate. JD ran. He hit the ladder full speed, gripping the cold rungs and descending as fast as he could. The metal groaned under his weight, shaking slightly. Above him, banging. His pursuers were searching. Check those crates. He couldn't have gone far. JD clenched his jaw and kept climbing down. The air grew colder. The scent of dust and oil filled his nose. Then, he reached the bottom and nearly fell backward. Because what he saw didn't make sense. The lower level wasn't another storage area. It was a corridor, a massive underground tunnel stretching into the darkness, its walls made of reinforced concrete. Thick, black cables ran along the ceiling, disappearing into the gloom. And the weirdest part? There were old train tracks. JD swallowed hard. This wasn't some random basement. This was a hidden transport tunnel. For who? For what? He didn't get to wonder for long. Because from the far end of the tunnel, where the darkness swallowed the tracks, something moved. A low rumble echoed through the space. JD's breath hitched. Was that a train? Above, the men were still searching. Behind, the tunnel stretched into the unknown, and ahead, something was coming. JD's instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then, a light, a faint, yellow glow flickered at the far end of the tunnel. JD's pulse hammered. The rumbling grew louder. It wasn't a train. It was a vehicle, and it was heading straight for him. JD's fingers clenched into fists. He had two choices: wait and see who was coming, or risk running into the darkness. Neither option felt good. Then, a voice, deep, commanding, blasting through a hidden speaker in the tunnel walls. "Jonathan Davis, we've been expecting you." JD's blood ran cold. They knew his name. Who the hell were they? The tunnel walls seemed to close in around him as the rumbling vehicle approached. A set of bright yellow headlights flared to life, cutting through the darkness like a blade. JD squinted, raising a hand to shield his eyes. The light bounced off something metallic, sleek, black, armored. Not a train, not a regular car, a military-grade transport, and it was coming fast. JD's muscles coiled. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. His mind was still trying to process the impossible reality around him. A government bunker under a diner? A hidden tunnel? A vehicle that looked straight out of a sci-fi movie? Nothing made sense. The voice returned, calm, precise, cold. Step forward, slowly, hands visible. JD's jaw clenched, like hell. He pivoted, ready to bolt back up the ladder, but before he could move, a sudden, sharp hiss filled the air. Then, gas. A thin, almost invisible mist started leaking from vents in the tunnel walls. The moment it hit JD's nose, he felt it, thick, chemical, disorienting. His limbs grew heavy. His vision blurred. They weren't giving him a choice. JD staggered forward, every step like walking through wet concrete. The armored vehicle came to a stop. A door hissed open, and from the shadows, they stepped out. JD had seen government agents before: FBI, DEA, even some undercover cops. But these guys? Different. 3 figures in matte black tactical suits stepped forward, faces hidden behind sleek high-tech visors. No logos, no badges, nothing identifiable. The one in the center was the tallest, at least 6'5", and moved with the kind of confidence that came from being the one in charge. JD struggled to stay upright as the gas messed with his balance. His fingers tingled. His head felt like it was full of static. Then, the leader spoke. "We've been watching you, Mr. Davis." JD forced himself to focus. His tongue felt thick. "Yeah? Well, I wish I could say the same." The agent didn't react. Not a single twitch. "You should not be here," the man continued. "You were not meant to see any of this." JD swallowed hard. That sounded a hell of a lot like a death sentence. His brain fought through the haze, trying to piece together an escape plan. But there was nowhere to go. No weapon. No allies. No idea what he was even up against. Then, the agent reached into his suit. JD tensed, expecting a gun. Instead, the man pulled out a file, a thick weathered folder, bound in a crumbling leather strap. The paper inside looked decades old. The agent held it out. "You should read this." JD hesitated. What the hell was this? Some kind of trap? His hands were shaking as he took the file. He fumbled with the strap, flipping it open. The first page alone made his pulse skyrocket. Project Dawn, top secret, and below that a black and white photo of his father. JD's stomach dropped. No, that wasn't possible. JD's father had died when he was 10. At least that's what he had always believed. But staring at the grainy government document in his hands, another truth began to take shape. The report was dated 1989. His father's name was listed. His photo was there. But the details? They made no sense. Lieutenant Colonel James Davis. Status: classified. Last known location: Sector 7. Disappearance: unconfirmed. Disappearance? JD's breath hitched. He flipped through the file with trembling fingers. There were maps, codes, and mission logs, a blurry satellite image of a massive structure buried underground. And then, at the very back of the folder, a final document. Handwritten note, scrawled in his father's handwriting. "If you're reading this, JD, it means they finally let you in, or you found your way here yourself. Either way, there are things you need to know. Things they'll never tell you. Don't trust them. Don't believe a word they say. And for God's sake, don't go into the black zone." JD's breath came fast and sharp. The words blurred as his vision spun. The black zone? What the hell was that? He looked up at the agent, whose visor reflected nothing but darkness. "What is this?" JD demanded. "Where is my father?" The agent didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside. And behind him, a massive steel door slid open. Beyond it, a dimly lit corridor stretched into the unknown. The air inside seemed colder, heavier. JD's gut screamed at him to turn back, but his father's words echoed in his head. "Don't go into the black zone." The agent finally spoke again. "It's time to decide, Mr. Davis." His voice was calm, unshaken. "Do you want to know the truth?" JD's heart pounded like a war drum because he already knew. Once he stepped through that door, there was no going back. As the story fades, one question lingers. What would you do? Life isn't about waiting for answers. It's about daring to ask the right questions. Trust your instincts. Embrace the unknown. Take the leap. Because sometimes, the biggest breakthroughs come when we step beyond the limits of what we believe is possible. What are your thoughts? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Stay tuned for more.